Hello everyone. Today we're having a huge guest and very important interview and a very interesting discussion. And right now we are here with Michael Peters from Ankura, Senior Director of Ankura. And we are here in the financial center, financial capital of Europe, Frankfurt. Hello Michael, it's nice seeing you in person here. And thank you for joining us for that very interesting discussion. So, tell me a little bit about our background and where we are right now.
So, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Michael Peters from Ankura, and I'm really excited to have you today because we are here in the middle of the financial district at the Opera. The Opera, you see, it's a very beautiful place to be, and we have a beautiful weather as well today, more than 30 degrees. It's just in the morning, but I hope that we have a nice interview today because we are talking about anti-money laundering aspects. And why Frankfurt is important is, of course, that we have now won that the anti-money laundering authority will be based here in Frankfurt. So with that, we have a lot of things to talk about. And I'm really excited to have you today here in Frankfurt, in the middle of the heart of the financial district. And we are talking about all the things around anti-money laundering and how to fight in the future next years, 3 to 5 years.
Yes, the importance of this discussion is really amazing because we'll cover some topics as AMLA, as the new regulations, and we'll talk about them from the financial center, from the anti-money laundering center of Europe.
I'm really excited to have you today. And we are talking the whole day about that topic. And yeah, let's go and talk about exactly these points, what are important for the future time.
All right, Michael, could you please give us and our viewers a short overview of your career path, what you were doing in German Federal Criminal Police and in Deutsche Bank, for example, and where are you now?
Okay, so yes, I have worked as a detective within Federal Criminal Police Office in several units and areas. And at the end, I was also the deputy head of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Germany. And this was the time when the FIU was part of the Federal Criminal Police Office. Later on, they switched in the Ministry of Finance. But before that, I was also an investigator going around all over the world, hunting the illegal money by doing investigations globally. So that means we hunted also organized crime groups where the predicate offense is outside of Germany, but then the money flows to Germany. That was the starting point. So usually you get suspicious activity reports, for example, by the banks reported, and then you start hunting the money. Where does the money come from? And is it an illegal source, right? And that is what we have done. And we then, of course, investigated very hardly also against organized crime groups. So this was my career path within Federal Criminal Police Office. And then I decided to move to the private sector. And I worked for a private institution, Deutsche Bank, and I was responsible for a wide range of specific regulations with regards to KYC, for example, transaction monitoring alerts, suspicious activity reporting, policy and procedure framework, and also training and other things. So it was very interesting for me to see the differences, what an investigator does as an official authority to hunt money launderers, and on the other hand side, to detect on the prevention side within a bank how to identify illegal money or perpetrators.
Fascinating. That huge expertise really shows your diverse experience from different sectors, from public sector, from private sector, and you understand like the whole picture from different angles, as to speak. And where are we now?
We are here in front of our building, Ankura's headquarters in Frankfurt. And we have a lot of team members who are now acting as a consultant. Of course, we have also experts out of the governmental bodies, but also economists and others who have different interdisciplinary expertise that is necessary really to detect in certain instances money laundering, terrorist financing, and also sanction breaches. So what we're doing here as a consulting firm is combine the expertise and helping our clients, mainly banks, but also governmental bodies and other obliged parties from the AML law to improve their regime, policy procedure framework, as well as hunting the perpetrators. So we are, as consultants, helping others in improving their own regimes and their own approaches.
What is the Ankura's approach to anti-financial crime? Maybe you have some special
I would
traits.
say the consultants as such have nearly the same offerings in their portfolio. So a little bit differences are there when you're talking about the size of a company, also when we are talking about how to be agile. So there are, I would say, not so many differences, but what we are doing is much more in the area of finding new ways to be more efficient and effective. Means that we sometimes think out of the box, and we like to improve the regimes within our clients much easier. So I do not want to say we are better than others. We just have other approaches, I would say. So with that, I worked also for other companies, consulting companies, 2 Big Four companies, and I have now seen the differences. But I can say that Ankura is a bunch of experts, mainly coming out of authorities worldwide. We have a hub also in the US. We have also hubs in the UK and other regions. But we are more interested in helping on strategic level.
Maybe, Michael, you have some interesting real-life cases from your career that you could share with our viewers.
Yes, so I could not explain everything in detail because by secrecy rules, right? But I can give you some impressions that, of course, the nature of being an investigator with an authority as a detective, these cases were very interesting with regards to organized crime groups. I don't know Russian organized crime, but was also other nationals. And these kind of cases are long-term cases. You have really to be very resistant, and you have to follow the money over different countries. And with that, we were able really to find out that organized crime groups out of the Russian organized crime has laundered a lot of money to Germany, and we brought that perpetrator into prison, and it was the first sentence to a person where the predicate offense has been abroad. So with that, we were successful, and so we were also lucky, and we celebrated our, I would say, success in that investigation. So I could not go into detail now, but when you compare that with, for example, the measures to be done in a bank, you of course do not these kind of investigation as investigator on the authority side, but you as a part of raising I would say first suspicion within a bank is also very exciting. Means that you are in the first instance that person maybe who find a suspicion, and then you also collect a lot of additional information and then enable the authorities by sending a suspicious activity report, for example, information, and this could lead also to very big investigations at the end. With that, so it doesn't matter where you play which role It is more that you have your specific role. And with that, I would say all parts of doing that job in the area of anti-financial crime, you have to be enthusiastic, right?
Absolutely, because there is always a probability that even a junior member of the team, of the AML team, can find some suspicious transaction,
exactly,
which will lead to a huge investigation and a huge case. Because money laundering schemes are really subtle, are really sophisticated, and they may consist of multiple transactions, multiple small transactions, but if you find one of them, it will lead to a larger scheme.
Exactly, this is what I want to point out. So that means that you have to understand the overall setting of anti-financial crime where you're working in, to understand it from a global perspective, from a local perspective, and also with regards to your specific obligation, your personal role, being a KYC officer, transaction monitoring officer, or driving also suspicious activity reports. But also in case of you are just preparing training material for your entire team, all are full of responsibility. And at the end, just when you put everything together, you could work and be very great in your area. At the end, I would say we want to fight financial crime. And this is exactly that reason why you should decide to be a money laundering officer or working in that space, right?
Absolutely. Continuing with your career path, let's move on to Ankura. Tell our listeners some facts about Ankura, its role in anti-money laundering, and what Ankura is doing to fighting financial crimes.
So I can talk about Ankura, where I'm working currently, but I can say as such, the consulting industry, what are their obligations, what they are doing. So we have talked about investigators, prosecuting officers, courts. We have talked about obliged parties like banks. And there are also the consultants. And what are the consultants doing in that area is, with the broader market view, they do understand sometimes new processes. They understand and can compare to use new processes, new technology. They have the experience out of the market, being in the past, maybe also in a bank, worked in a bank, and also when doing such projects. There are different kind of projects you can do. For example, you can work in the area of run the bank or run the business, means that is case handling treated, for example, KYC, transaction monitoring, suspicious activity reporting, sanctions, hits to be treated. Also, I would say in the area of negative media screening and all the things, right, you can support. And this is a kind of, you have to understand what is really the concrete policy process rule set within one bank. And you have to adapt very quickly and bring also your experiences in, what maybe are the differentiators, what the clients are doing in other banks. So with that, you can also give advices and not just doing that case handling task. Second part is you can improve processes in the change, or maybe there is an acquisition be made by one bank in buying another bank. And with that merger, you can then, of course, give you advice how to merge the compliance practices, for example. But also other trigger points leads to improvements. So the processes, the policies, everything what is in the area of change, you could support the clients with regards to your experiences. And the third pillar is what we are talking maybe today a little bit more is regulatory changes. For example, now the new EU AML package, how to treat it, how to implement, how, and what is the best way, and what are circumstances and aspects to follow. With that, we call it regulatory advice, means we are looking after, that changes to be made by new regulations.
Thank you, Michael. You've had a really fascinating journey that shows your huge expertise in the AML industry. And I suggest we move on to the most important topic of today's interview, is the new AML regulation of the European Union and the AMLA regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's discuss briefly the contents of the new regulations. Basically, they are all of the articles in those regulations are basically referring to the guidelines which will be prepared by the new anti-money laundering authority. But there are some articles, for example, which we discussed with Igoris in the previous interview, Article 11 to Article 13, that are applicable right now, and they are focusing on the responsibilities of the compliance departments, of the AML staff, what they should do, what their responsibilities are, how those AML departments should look like, and the training, of course. And those are the articles that are applicable already today. And so basically the most important point here is to understand the impact of those regulations and why they were adopted by the European Union.
Okay, first of all, we have to explain that we have a global standard setter. You know, that is the FATF, Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering. They have a lot of, I would say, global framework defined. What the regional policymakers for European Union is the Commission, and therefore the idea was to harmonize much more than in the past these rule sets by the fact that in the past we had identified that all the 27 European countries has in detail different rule sets. And this is, of course, when you're thinking about how to protect the European Union as such, important to have a one level playing field. I can give you a lot of details of that, what is the rationale behind. So, for example, when you are thinking about calculation of ultimate beneficial ownership structure, we had really different rule sets in the countries. And with that, the EU said we need one rule set, one common standard that in case of you're working as a bank and multiple jurisdictions within the EU, that you not have to have individual national regulations in place. And then, of course, there are gaps between these regulations. So this is the overall idea how to, why we had now an EU-wide new package, AML package. But a little bit of criticism of this in the practice is that we have, of course, now some rules which gonna be harmonized, but there's also a space for national regulations. So still they maybe intend to have other rules. I would say not the minimum standards are the same, but you can go further and make stricter rules, for example. And in case of that, you still have the gaps between the countries. So long story short, there's now the first time that we have a regulation in place. And regulation means that that is directly binding to all 27 countries. In the past, we just had directives. We have still one directive. This sixth AML directive will replace all these five, what has been put into place in the past. But what is the difference between the regulation and the directives are the circumstances that directives are mostly addressed points to authorities rather than the regulation is addressed to obliged parties like banks, right? And with that, we are looking forward how the 27 countries now take this new rule set and how they implement it into their national law. So with that, it's very important to understand that overall rule set coming from the EU, but also how the AMLA, as a new authority who is also obliged to set different and new standards with regards to regulatory technical standards, and they have to define and clear out some points who are not yet really defined very precise. Means that for the next years you also have to understand and to observe if new rules and technical standards to be published by the AMLA, but also from the national regulators, how the setting will be in detail. So what I want to say at the end, in a nutshell, is we have a new rule set. We have to understand that rule set, but the journey is not ended so far. We really have to observe and to have I would say, kind of change program on a daily basis to understand when new rules by national regulator or the AMLA will come into place.
All right. But briefly about the impact, I think it's probably very early to talk about the impact of the new regulation because there are a lot of references to some theoretical guidelines of AMLA, which will be developed. But possibly how costly it would be for the financial sector to implement those these regulations and to follow the AMLA's guidelines?
Very good question. So I would say in the beginning of using and follow the new rule sets, there's a huge impact. I give you briefly some examples. A huge impact for the private sector, who is obliged to fulfill certain regulations. So when we are talking about, for example, the identifying of ultimate beneficial ownership structure, there are new thresholds. There are also new data to be collected by the obliged parties, the banks, for example, and you have to understand then what additional information and how to get this information from your end client. Means we have new cycles, for example, for review tasks. We have to understand what is the smoothest way to gather all these informations, and do we really have the same rule sets between these 27 countries in the EU? Means that in detail the national regulator could have stronger requirements, and as I said, you have to observe that, but you have also to start now preparing yourself how to approach that. When we are talking about, for example, the ultimate beneficial owners, you have now to sort out which additional data to be collected from your end client. And then to make sure that you can also document and save all these new informations in your respective systems, data systems, to be collected, because there's an implementation phase of 3 years, up from July this year till mid of 27. But when you think about banks who has millions of clients, that is a lot of things to collect and to do and to reach out to the clients maybe. So there are different ways how to gather this information. You can use also, I would say, other firms who are specialized on that collection, but you have to decide your own way what is, I would say, effective and efficient to gather this information. And this is just one piece of that new EU regulation. So you have to have an overall program and a kind of matrix where are changes to be made and how does that impact your internal measurements and your internal prevention regime, right? So this is the reason why some bigger banks already decided to set up a change program to ensure that they really meet all these requirements in the next couple of years by also taking into account new standards to be defined by, as I said, AMLA or other stakeholders, national stakeholders.
Yes, because considering the complex structure and infrastructure of huge banks, it's really important for them to think about the implementation of new guidelines, of new regulations already right now, because the discussion will take some time, and also the implementation as well, the preparation of all the materials, of all the data, etc.
But in addition to that, there are also other, I would say, points to be viewed. For example, when you're working in a bank who is based outside the EU and the mothership is outside the EU, maybe you then have to sort out the gaps between regulation in that country outside the EU as group-wide standards, and then compare, making kind of gap analysis. What are the new EU AML regulations as a minimum, is a must? And then you have to discuss also with your mother outside the EU, what are the reasons to follow now these EU new guidelines, right? This is one case. And the other case is if you are part of a mother who is based in the EU, for example, in Belgium or in the Netherlands, right? In detail, maybe they have stronger rule sets also by interpretation of the EU AML package. As I already said, there is a possibility really to be stronger. And then you are really obliged also to follow the internal group-wide standards, but also then to figure out when it comes down to specific national regulation. So there's a kind of complexity in really putting the things into practice. Means this is not just to observe the new rule set. If you're part of a bigger group, then you have to also taking into account all these other, I would say, complexity.
Absolutely. And considering also the interconnected nature of the European financial system and the United Kingdom's financial system.
Yes.
The banks from the United Kingdom, they should think about that, probably.
I would say the key here is we have to really observe how United Kingdom will treat this new EU AML package. Are they willing to adopt 100% of that new rule set? Or are they saying we do our own rule set because we are not part and under the regulation of the EU? So this is important, but there are some aspects why UK should follow that, because if UK have their own rule set, for example, the threshold for identifying ultimate beneficial owners, then of course by doing that gap analysis with all the branches acting in the EU, you have always differences. And with that differences, you have much more work to do, and you have to differentiate within the work in detail in the countries. Means my stake here is that UK should, and there are some advantages, why really to adopt 100%. That would be very interesting for that banks or also that end clients who are based in the UK. For example, there are some banks, the mother is located in the UK, how they will treat that. So I would prefer to have a discussion with the UK governmental bodies, really to sort out what are advantages maybe also some disadvantages. They maybe will think that is more work to do for them to follow this EU-wide new regulation. But at the end, realizing that they have also branches in different countries within the EU, then at the end, the overall impact is lower to adopting 100%.
Absolutely. The discussion between those regions is really important right now. Also considering how will be established the cooperation of the new anti-money laundering authority in the European Union with the FCA.
Exactly.
Because absolutely they will need to cooperate on some matters, because some banks probably will be supervised by AMLA that are parts also of the UK financial system that will be directly supervised by AMLA here. And they should cooperate on that matter, absolutely.
Yeah. So when we're talking about AMLA, I mean, there are a lot of hopes put into AMLA and new responsibilities. But we have to be careful that the new authority, EU-wide authority, just have to find themselves. Means, first of all, they have to get the right resources with a full bench of expertise out of that 27 countries, but also maybe out of Frankfurt or Germany, because AMLA is based here. And they have to identify the most important areas where they, in a kind of priority list, starting with. So they have to have do their own homeworks to design their own work environment, but also in parallel to think about which RTS, regulatory technical standards, are most important to be covered. And also they have different obligations in the future. It's the kind of being a supervisory body for, they said in the beginning, 40 institutions to be named by criteria. But also they have a coordination role with regards to FAUs. So we have 27 FAUs within the EU, and the gap has been identified that these FAUs are cooperating on concrete cases where the information gathering is necessary to find out about these concrete specific case, right? This is all done in the past, but overall programs, for example, in the Baltic regions, or in the Nordics, or in the Benelux area, when you have specific typologies in specific regions and areas, that the AMLA will coordinate much more programs in that area, right? So this is the second. And the third one is they will also care about sanction topics and also about the area outside the banking, financial industry to be strengthened, because we have learned in the past 10 years or longer that banking area is very highly regulated and cares a lot about financial crime, and the non-financial sector is behind that. And this is the reason why they said we want to have much more pressure, and also on the left eye, more look into this area supporting the 27 countries, but also put pressure on these area with obliged parties outside the financial sector, right? So a lot of things to do in parallel. For me, key is you have to find the right resources and you have to find the right priorities.
All right. But also really important point here is whether it's even possible to harmonize all the approaches, all the regulatory approaches in all the 27 countries. Because of different economic conditions of those countries. For example, some European economies are more cash-based comparing to other more developed countries, as to speak?
This is a very important point you're raising. I think that we have the goal to have a harmonized rule set does not mean that in detail that you have to have the exactly same measures in place. It really depends on your country, on the region, and also on different circumstances. I will come to that point by the fact that all 27 countries are invited to have an kind of risk assessment, national risk assessment. And the idea is that from all these influences for your specific country to be observed and to analyze by a risk assessment leads to different measures in detail. So that is a kind of risk-based approach, means that this approach takes into account that we have in specific countries specific risks, and also from the cultural behavior, the background of the country. They have all specific areas what is more important rather than maybe in another country. With that, the overall idea to have a harmonized level playing field within the EU is just the overall setting of the rule set. It's not in detail, and this is for me the right way to do so. It's not that you have to have exactly the same measures in place in the specific countries. You mentioned cash transactions, for example. Some countries are, from their history, more in the cash-based economy, and others are not. So, and then also maybe going more down in industries than when we're talking about car dealers or something like that. All countries, when you compare the 27 countries with regards to car dealers, you can think, okay, it's always the same criminal behavior. No, it's not. When we compare Poland with Germany or with the Netherlands, they have in detail different typologies in the area of car dealers, right? And so what I want to say is, it is important then really to understand your circumstances in that area where you are responsible for.
Absolutely, because of the different risks in detail and different approaches that are caused by the differences in culture and in history.
Yeah, and also this is the reason why we do have overall global typology papers, usually coming from the FATF, but we do have also local typology papers, and it is necessary to have them because criminality differs also between the countries. Not in all areas, but you have to realize where the gaps lay to be more precise in your prevention measures.
Absolutely. So a lot of challenges and a lot of new guidelines await us in the near future. What is the role of training here? Because it's also underlined in the new AML regulation of the European Union in the Article 13, if I'm not mistaken, that the training should be made annually, but probably even more frequently because of the new guidelines, and it should be made ad hoc, as to speak, when the AMLA, for example, issues a new guideline, then you have such training, organizational training.
So I would say training is one of the key elements of being good prepared for fighting against financial crime. Why? We have an overall obligation to train the employees within an obliged party, for example, right, in the banks. And this is mostly an overall training to understand what is money laundering about, what are in a nutshell, the regulations and all these things, right? But for the individuals working in a specific area, for example, as I mentioned earlier, in the KYC or transaction monitoring or suspicious activity reporting department unit, you have to have a specific training set up to understand in what environment you are working and what is in that specific responsibility important to understand and to know. So I would say it's a kind of cascade that you are beginning overall training to understand the rule sets and what is the rationale behind all these obligations and fighting against financial crime. But the more you are specialized in your responsibility, the more you have to train exactly that area. So, for example, an officer who deals with internal suspicious activity reportings has to understand the chain from the beginning until the end, what will happen within an FAU, what will an investigator do, or the prosecuting office, to understand what is important for them to know, that you can gather and raise these informations who are important for these other official authorities at the end. So this is just one example. When you're a KYC officer, you have to understand which information to be gathered with what rationale, why these information in the future could be relevant for internal purposes, to understand and maybe to figure out is there a suspicion or not, but also collecting some information in case of this would be reported to an authority that you have these important information at hand, right? So what I want to say is, as I said already, training concept is key, and you should, for yourself, raise the question, am I trained really perfectly for doing my job? And so we are talking now about new overall regulations, new requirements coming from the EU. This is a big bunch of new aspects. But for you, in your environment, your personal work environment, it's really important then to summarize for yourself what out of these aspects are, for me personally, special relevant.
Absolutely. And also, as you've mentioned, there will be a lot of challenges for financial institutions and other obliged entities to implement new procedures, new infrastructure, but also to implement new training. Mm-hmm. And probably it is more wise and efficient to engage an external party. For example, as consultants, as you've mentioned, consultants are present in all the industries. Mm-hmm. They see what other banks are doing, and they can give their advice based on the other clients' experiences to that particular client, as with the training.
Exactly. You said that, or what is my observation is that when you're working in one bank, for example, you have just your internal environment, you are looking just in your internal rule settings, right? And engaging a consultant is sometimes an advantage by having outside-in views. Means that you are not just working in your environment where you have worked the last couple of years. You get also views what banks in the same situation does with other approaches, for example. And this also, as you said, with regards to training, when you engage a consultant, for example, doing a specific task, supporting in case handling tasks like that, then by doing things on another way, it's also a kind of training to learn from that consultant how they treat in the same situation, but with their background out of multiple other engagements in the past, right? So this is also a part of training. But as I said, for me, it's key that you have the overall picture, but then going down really in that area, what you're responsible for when you're serving as or acting as a money laundering reporting officer in a small bank, and you are the only one, the longsome rider, right? Then you have to know everything about all these rules, and also with regards to these obligations, KYC, transaction monitoring, policy procedure framework, everything, right? But when you're working in a big bank and you have hundreds of different units, then of course it is more a kind of specialization. And when you are specialized on a specific topic, of course, this area you're covering is most relevant for your training. But I also prefer to rotate between units, because you have then also more insights of neighbor units where you have interlinks to.
Yes. So engaging an external party might be really effective, but probably it's really important to follow all the procedures regarding third-party due diligence that are really important here.
Exactly. So the third-party due diligence is also relevant, but so what I want to say is the better you are trained, the better you can really fight against financial crime. And of course, the longer you're working in that area, the more experience you have, and then it's also easier to identify suspicion, to identify gaps in your regime and all these things. So what I want to say here is communication internally and with externals is also key. And please take audit findings as lessons learned and not just a punishment, because the auditors also are interested in raise the quality of the overall rule set and the regime internally, and take this really as a kind of best practice. Or sometimes it's hard because you get maybe also a fine at the end, but I would say it's more a kind of lessons learned and take it into account in your overall regime. So we are not an audit firm, but we know that, of course, everybody has been audited with regards to anti-financial crime regime. And I would say these kind of finding list is also a list of how to improve the internal regime, right?
Thank you for your expertise, Michael.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for that fruitful discussion today. I think our listeners are amazed with your expertise, that AMLA is really important right now, and that every professional in the industry should keep an eye on the development of those regulations, on the development of AMLA and what guidances they will issue. Maybe you have some farewell words for our AML professionals in Europe and globally.
Of course, first of all, thank you very much for that really great discussion today. So we have pointed out also new aspects. What I think is important really to observe the new regulations, especially the anti-money laundering technical standards, regulatory technical standards coming from the AMLA here in Frankfurt, but also to be up to date with new regulations from your national regulator means that there's a lot and a bunch of new regulations coming. And with that, training is key. You should really be in front of the situation. You should understand what are the new rules, but also to become a very good risk officer, anti-money laundering officer, means that you should also go with new technology to understand how to use artificial intelligence and also other techniques. Well, with that, I would say it's really exciting for everybody who work in the space of anti-money laundering. That is really future professional. And for that, I would say you're all invited to come to Frankfurt, and also where you are based, really work very hard on your development and also to fight against anti-financial crime and anti-money laundering.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Michael.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Please throw a huge like to Michael and subscribe to our channel, because we'll share a lot of things on AMLA and on the new developments of the European regulations. And stay tuned.